The most feared man in Asia was on his knees, not metaphorically, not in some figurative collapse of authority or quiet surrender of pride. Literally, physically on one knee, on the cold obsidian floor of the most dangerous room in Seoul, his head bowed, his hands pressed flat against his thigh, the posture of a man who had made a decision he could not take back. The guards didn't know what to do. That was the thing. That was the detail that would haunt every single person in that room for the rest of their lives. Not the kneeling itself, but the paralysis it produced. These were men who had trained for years to react without thinking, men who had stood unflinching in rooms where presidents lost their nerve, men for whom hesitation was a career-ending offense, and sometimes worse than that. They stood there doing absolutely nothing. One of them, the tallest, stationed nearest the door, had his hand on his weapon. His fingers had found the grip before his mind issued the instruction. But the draw never came, because something in his body, something older and deeper than training, had locked him in place the moment he understood what he was actually looking at. Two little girls, standing in the center of the forbidden office on the 63rd floor of Kang Tower, a floor that didn't exist on any building directory, a floor that fewer than 11 people in the world could access, a floor that the outside world had never once heard a sound from, stood two black twin girls, no older than 7, one in white, one in red. Their box braids fell past their shoulders, decorated with small gold beads that caught the low light of the room and scattered it softly, like something precious suspended in the air around them. They weren't afraid. That was the second thing, the thing that followed the first and made it worse. They stood with the particular stillness of people who had arrived exactly where they intended to arrive, looking at exactly what they expected to see. The girl in white looked down at the kneeling man with an expression that contained no triumph, no surprise, no warmth, and no cruelty. Just clarity. The expression of someone collecting something that already belonged to them. The girl in red was scanning the room, methodical, taking inventory. Her eyes moved across the guards, the weapons, the architecture, the painting on the wall, the desk, and then stopped on something on the corner of the desk and held there for one long second before moving on. Nobody spoke. The silence in that room was not ordinary silence. It was the specific, pressurized silence of a moment so structurally impossible that every person inside it was still trying to determine whether it was real. $40 billion had moved through this room. Governments had been redirected from this room. Men had entered this room and not come out the same, or not come out at all. And the most feared Korean mafia boss alive was on his knees in the middle of it, in front of 2 children, and his hands were trembling. In the far corner, a senior lieutenant named Min Jun reached for his radio. The girl in white turned her head toward him. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. "You won't need that," she said. Min Jun's hand stopped in midair. Her voice was small, clear, completely without urgency. It was the voice of someone who had already calculated every possible response to every possible action in this room and found all of them irrelevant. The voice of someone who had been preparing for this moment for years and had arrived to find it exactly as expected. The girl in red finally stopped scanning. She looked at the man on his knees. "Stand up," she said quietly. "We have a lot to talk about." And that was when Min Jun realized, staring at those gold beads, at the particular way they were woven into the braids, at the specific pattern of them that he had seen only once before in a photograph taken 10 years ago at a harbor somewhere warm, that nothing about this night was going to end the way any of them had imagined it would. He recognized the beads. To understand what happened on that Tuesday night in October, you have to understand what the 63rd floor was. Officially, it didn't exist. There was no button for it in any elevator panel, no stairwell marking, no fire safety map that acknowledged its presence. The only access point was a private elevator concealed behind a false wall on the 62nd floor, and reaching it required 3 things in sequence: a 6-digit code, a biometric palm scan, and the specific radio frequency emitted by a chip embedded in a card that fewer than 11 people in the world had ever held. The men who worked up there called it the silence. Not because it was quiet, though it was, always, the particular quiet of a room designed to absorb what happened inside it, but because nothing that occurred on that floor was ever heard anywhere else. Not negotiations, not confessions, not the sounds that sometimes followed negotiations and confessions. Nothing left that corridor. Nothing was supposed to. Kang Woo had built it to be the center of everything. Not just his operations, everything. The syndicate he controlled had its roots in 14 countries, its financial instruments spread across 7 jurisdictions, its influence threaded through governments and corporations and logistics networks on 4 continents. At the peak of it all, like the keystone of an arch, sat the 63rd floor of Kang Tower. Sat this room. Sat him. The Iron Wall, they called him. Chil Byuk. The name had come early in his career and never left, because nothing about the way Kang Woo operated ever gave it reason to. He did not negotiate from fear. He did not compromise from weakness. He had built something that the world's most dangerous people moved carefully around, and he had done it through a combination of strategic brilliance, absolute ruthlessness, and a quality that was rarer than either of those things.
He had never, in 15 years of sitting at the top, broken his word. The guards on the 63rd floor had served under him for a combined total of 63 years. They had watched him receive senators and kingpins and shadow council operatives in this room. They had watched him dismantle organizations twice his size with the calm efficiency of a man solving a mathematics problem. They had watched him reduce men who controlled armies to the status of junior employees with a single conversation. They had never seen him kneel. Not once, not for anything. So when the private elevator, the one that required 3 things in sequence, the one that fewer than 11 people could access, opened at 9:47 on a Tuesday night, and 2 little girls stepped out, the guards' training didn't fail them so much as encounter something it had no category for. The girl in white walked ahead. She moved without hurry, without performance, without the particular careful stillness that people adopt when they're trying to signal harmlessness to armed men. She moved as though the armed men were simply part of the room she was walking through, relevant only as furniture, present but not of concern. The girl in red walked half a step behind. Her eyes were the difference between them. Where her sister's gaze was forward and purposeful, Rain's eyes were doing something else entirely, cataloging, processing, burning with something that had been burning for 4 years without cooling. "Stop." The tallest guard raised his weapon. His voice had authority in it, that particular quality of command that comes from years of practice, the sound that makes most people's bodies comply before their minds process the instruction. "This floor is restricted. Identify yourselves. How did you access?" "The code is 77319, the girl in white said. Just that. Just the code, delivered with the flatness of someone reading a number off a page they have read many times before. Then the palm sequence using secondary biometric protocol. Then the override card. A pause. "You know whose sequence that is." The guard's hand went rigid. Because he did know. Everyone on this floor knew. There was only one person in the world whose override card used that specific sequence. One person who had built this floor, designed this system, written these protocols from the ground up, and that person had been gone for 4 years. The massive reinforced doors at the end of the corridor opened. Not because a guard reached for the release. From inside. From the man who had been watching the security feed since the moment the elevator arrived, who had seen something on that monitor that had removed all the temperature from his blood, who needed to see it up close, who needed to make absolutely certain he wasn't wrong. For 3 seconds, maybe 4,
The part of him that had survived 20 years of this world by never hesitating ran the calculation, the way it always ran calculations, clean, fast, without sentiment. An intrusion on the 63rd floor, unknown parties with access that should not exist. Protocol was clear. Protocol had always been clear. He pressed the door release. Some calculations, he had learned, you run and then ignore. Some doors you open not because the math says to, but because you already know, in the part of yourself that exists before the math, that there is only one thing left to do. Kang Woo stood at the center of his office as the two girls walked through the doorway toward him. He stood there while they crossed the distance. He stood there until Davina stopped 2 feet in front of him and looked up at him, and he looked down at her. And he saw, in the angle of her jaw and the clarity of her eyes and the specific way she was holding herself, something that ended a sentence he had been running for 4 years. Then he knelt. The room went to the kind of silence that has physical weight. Min Jun's mouth was open. Both bodyguards by the window had gone completely still. The specific stillness of people whose bodies have stopped waiting for instructions because their brains have stopped issuing them. Every person in the room experienced in that moment the same impossible sensation, the restructuring of a world they had believed they understood. Kang Woo, the Iron Wall, the most feared Korean mafia boss alive, the man who had not bent his knee for any living thing in 15 years, pressed his hands flat against his thigh and bowed his head before 2 7-year-old girls. "Davina," he said. The word came out rough, scraped, like something that had been living behind concrete for years and was only now, for the first time, being allowed to breathe. Rain. There is a version of this story that starts here, with the kneeling, with the gold beads, with the impossible image of the iron wall brought low by 2 small girls in a forbidden office. That version is dramatic and surprising and satisfying in the way that reversals of power are always satisfying. But the version that matters starts 11 years earlier, in a warehouse at the edge of Incheon Harbor at 2 in the morning, when a 23-year-old who would become Kang Woo sat across a table from the only person who ever genuinely changed the shape of his life. Kang Woo had been trying to find the ghost for 8 months. Not to confront him. Kang Woo was many things at 23, but he was not delusional about the hierarchy of capability in the world he was operating in. He wanted to find him because everyone in that world who was serious, who was building towards something that would last, moved with a particular awareness of the ghost, the way ships move with awareness of the deep currents beneath them. You didn't have to see the current to know it was shaping everything. When he finally found him, not the other way around, though he would understand later that the ghost had known about the search from month 2 and had been deciding whether to allow it to succeed, the man was exactly what the rumors had described and completely unlike what Kang Woo had imagined. Medium height, lean, unhurried, eyes that were doing 4 things at once, only one of which had anything to do with the person he was talking to. He had a quality that Kang Woo had no word for at 23 and would spend years trying to name, a quality of knowing more about more things at a greater depth than anyone else in the room, not aggressively, not performatively, simply structurally, the way a deep river knows things the shallow water at the bank doesn't. "I've been watching you for 3 months, the ghost said. His Korean was flawless, accented with something Kang Woo couldn't immediately locate geographically, but idiomatically perfect. You're loyal. That's rarer than intelligence. I have intelligent people. I need someone loyal." "Loyal to what?" Kang Woo asked. The ghost smiled. It was a complete transformation. Suddenly, he looked younger, lighter, like a man who laughed easily when the context allowed it. "To something worth building," he said. They talked for 4 hours. By the time the conversation ended, Kang Woo understood 3 things with a certainty that would never leave him. This man was constructing something that would outlast both of them. He was being offered the chance to be part of it, and, most staggering of all, this man had already decided to trust him, not provisionally, not subject to review, genuinely, with full knowledge of who Kang Woo was and what he was capable of. It was the greatest gift anyone had ever given him, the thing he would spend the rest of his life failing to deserve. Over the next 9 years, Kang Woo learned what the ghost had been building, not a criminal empire. That was the surface, the exterior architecture, the visible form of something whose actual structure ran much deeper. The ghost had built a philosophy of power, how it moved, how it accumulated, how it could be used not just to dominate, but to protect, to redirect, to shape the conditions under which ordinary people lived their lives. He had studied 20 nations' systems of control and built something that moved through all of them like water through rock, invisible, patient, inevitable. He had also, 7 years into their partnership in a penthouse in Singapore at 11 at night, stood at a kitchen counter making tea while 2 3-month-old infants slept on the couch behind him, and said something that Kang Woo had understood intellectually in the moment and would spend years understanding at every other level. "Everything I am building is for them," he said, pouring water with the precision he applied to everything. Not as legacy, as inheritance, as a structure that will protect them and give them a foundation that nothing in this world can take from them. He had turned from the counter. His eyes, usually doing 4 things simultaneously, were doing only one thing. Protecting them is the only priority that supersedes anything else we do. You understand? Yes, Kang Woo said. He meant it. With every part of himself that was capable of meaning something, he meant it. He didn't know yet what it would cost him when he failed. There is one memory that Davina and Rain carried that no one else could verify, because no one else had been there for it. They were 2 years old, maybe a little older. It was late, past the hour when children are supposed to be sleeping, and Rain had refused sleep with the specific iron commitment that certain children bring to refusal, the kind that outlasts logic and patience and every reasonable approach and arrives eventually at the place where the adult simply has to wait it out. Their mother had been waiting it out for 2 hours. At some point, she stopped trying. She picked Rain up, settled her on her hip, and stood at the window of whatever apartment they were in that month. Rain never remembered which city, only the quality of the light, the way the street lamps made the rain on the glass look like something precious, and she just stood there, holding her, not rocking, not shushing, not performing the work of soothing, just standing with her daughter in the dark, looking at the rain. And then, for no reason that Rain could ever explain, nothing changed, nothing was said, the rain was just rain and the night was just night, her mother started laughing, not quietly, not politely, fully, helplessly, with her whole body, the kind of laughing that doesn't care who hears it, the kind that comes from somewhere past exhaustion and arrives at something that is almost the same feeling as joy. Rain, startled, had started laughing too. Neither of them knew what they were laughing at. It didn't matter. Davina had slept through all of it. She would spend years mildly irritated about this. What Rain remembered, the thing that had stayed with her through 4 years of grief and anger and the long, difficult work of becoming someone capable of walking into that office, was not the laugh itself. It was the feeling of being held by someone who was tired and a little lost, and choosing, in spite of all of that, to find something in the moment that was worth laughing at. She had never found a word for what her mother was, but that was the closest she ever got. The twins were born into a world their father had spent years engineering for their safety. Safe houses on 3 continents, a loyalty network that ran 2 layers below the visible organization, maintained by people who understood not just what the ghost was building, but why, and who had committed to the why as thoroughly as to the what. Financial structures distributed across jurisdictions in ways that even Kang Woo, the ghost's closest operational partner, could not fully map. And one other thing, something Kang Woo would not discover until it walked through his door 11 years later. Codes. embedded in the twins themselves, not in any device, not in any external system, but in their voices, their biometrics, the specific memories their father had given them in the years before they were old enough to understand what they were receiving. An inheritance designed to activate when they were ready, when they had grown enough, when they were capable of understanding what it meant and using it with the judgment it required. Their father had understood something about the future that most people couldn't see, that power doesn't survive by being held, it survives by being planted. He planted it in his daughters. And then, 4 years ago, the thread that should have been impossible to find, the one weakness in an otherwise flawless architecture, the one entirely human vulnerability that no amount of structural brilliance could engineer away, was pulled. He had loved their mother deeply, visibly, in a way that left a trace. Kang Woo told it without cleanup. He was a man who had spent 20 years learning to present information in forms that served his purposes, to shape narratives, to control what details reached which audiences, to use truth the way a sculptor uses material, selectively, in service of a desired form. He had told the story of that night many times, to many people, in the version that the organization needed to hear, the version that maintained the structure, the version that served the continuity of what he had been left to run. He didn't tell that version now. He told it in pieces, rough-edged, ill-fitting pieces that didn't assemble into anything clean, because the truth of what had happened didn't assemble into anything clean either. A rival faction, an organization that had spent years trying to find a fracture point in the syndicate's structure, probing and failing, and probing again with the specific patience of people who understood that walls, regardless of how solid they appear, eventually have a crack somewhere, had found her. Not the ghost directly, her. The woman he loved, who existed in the world with a warmth and visibility that his own perfect concealment had never quite reached her, because you cannot love someone the way he loved her and hide it well enough that determined people cannot find it. Through her, over months of careful surveillance, they found him. Through him, through the specific leverage point of knowing that the ghost had something he could not sacrifice, they found what they believed was their advantage. Kang Woo received the intelligence at 3 a.m, a confirmed threat, a location, a 72-hour timeline. He sat with it. The strategic calculation was real, and he ran it the way he ran every calculation, precisely, thoroughly, without sentiment. Moving the ghost's family would confirm that the syndicate had the intelligence. It would expose the source. It would compromise 3 years of embedded work inside the rival organization. It would, potentially, cost more lives down the line. He thought he had time. He thought he could neutralize the threat from the outside, surgically, without revealing what he knew, without moving anyone. He thought the extra hours were an asset to be used for planning rather than a margin to be eliminated by action. He sent men,
too few, to the wrong positions, based on intelligence that was less complete than he had assessed. 12 hours too late. His phone rang at 4:17 in the morning, 3 days after the intelligence arrived. He knew before he answered. That's the thing about certain calls. The body knows before the mind confirms, and his body had been knowing since the moment the first report came back wrong. Her voice, steady in the way of someone who has moved past the stage where steadiness is a choice and arrived at the stage where it's the only remaining option. In the background, the twins, both of them. That specific sound, small children frightened in the dark. A sound the human nervous system is wired to respond to, a sound that bypasses thought entirely and reaches somewhere much older. She had moved them somewhere away from the rest of the apartment, a closet, a back room. He could hear something heavy against a door. She was bracing it with her body. Kang Woo, just his name. The way you say the name of something you are choosing not to be angry at anymore, because there is no more time. I'm sending people. They're already... Listen to me.
Her voice dropped, controlled, the steadiness of someone reading very carefully from a very short list of remaining actions.
The door won't hold.
They're here. 3 of them. The door won't hold. The north window. I installed a secondary... Kang Woo. She said his name again, differently this time. The way you say the name of someone you are releasing, not with anger, not with bitterness, but with the specific grace of a person who has, in the last available moment, chosen forgiveness over the other thing. Tell my girls. His mouth opened. He heard the door. And then he heard her breath, just her breath, present, and then in the space of a single second, not present. No drama to it, no cinematic weight. Just a breath that had been there and then wasn't. The line stayed open. He counted 11 seconds of open silence before he moved. He would count them again every morning for 4 years, in the dark before the day began. In the forbidden office, telling this story to the 2 people it most concerned, Kang Woo's voice broke on 3 words. Only 3 words, and only barely. Just a fracture in the surface, like a crack in glass that hasn't yet spread, but everyone in the room heard it. Tell my girls. He looked at the photograph on the corner of his desk, at her face, at the smile that had its own light source. Those were her last words to me, he said, and I have spent 4 years trying to understand what she would have said next, what she meant me to tell you, whether she was asking me to explain, or to apologize, or to find you, or... He stopped. I have never found a satisfying answer. Rain's hands were curled at her sides. Then, briefly, almost invisibly, in a way that lasted 3 seconds before it was controlled and contained and put back wherever she kept it, her composure cracked at its foundation. Her chin dipped once, her jaw tightened around something that was moving through her. She didn't cry, her eyes didn't spill, but for 3 seconds the grief was visible on her face, naked and young, and the exact age it had been when it first arrived. 3 years old in a dark apartment, learning in real time what the world was capable of taking. 3 seconds. Then she was Rain again, present, steady, load-bearing. But Min-jun had seen it, everyone had seen it, and something in the room shifted permanently in those 3 seconds. Not softer, not weaker, but more real, more honest, more like the actual weight of what this night was and what it had cost everyone standing inside it. Davina, at the window, placed her palm flat against the glass. Just that, just her warm hand against the cold surface. Held it there for a moment like she was taking the temperature of something. Be honest with yourself. If you were in that room, if you were Rain, if those 3 seconds were yours, what would you do with them? What do you do with 4 years of grief that has finally found a face to land on? There are 2 kinds of guilt. The first kind is performed. It wears its remorse openly, references its failures in rooms where the reference will be noted, constructs a visible architecture of contrition that functions primarily as a bid for relief.
I did this for you.
This kind of guilt is common. It is also, ultimately, about the person feeling it, about managing the weight rather than answering it. The second kind does something else. It goes underground. It stops talking about itself. It asks a different question, not how do I feel better about this, but what does this require of me? And then it answers that question quietly, without witnesses, without the possibility of credit, in ways that can only ever partially address what was broken. Kang Woo had been carrying the second kind. Min-jun discovered it 6 months after the twins took control of the syndicate. He wasn't looking for it. He was auditing a separate set of accounts and found an anomaly in the routing. A payment 8 layers deep in the organization's financial architecture that had been moving regularly for 4 years to an address in Nairobi. He pulled the thread. What unraveled was a pattern, deliberate, sustained, invisible to everyone who had been operating the surface layer of the organization, including Min-jun himself. payments to 17 families connected to the Ghost's original network, people who had been loyal to the Foundation, who had known what was being built and why, and who had, in the years following the Ghost's death, been quietly maintained, kept in place, kept connected. An apartment in Nairobi, renewed every year, furnished with care, not the generic adequacy of a functional safe house, but the specific thoughtfulness of someone who had considered what the people living there would need. Books, a cast iron teapot in the kitchen, a shelf of educational materials calibrated to the ages the occupants would be each year, updated annually. A picture book on a particular shelf, positioned in a particular way, with something hidden between its pages for two specific children to find when they were ready. Min-jun sat with this information for a long time before he brought it to Rain. She read through the records in silence, set them down, sat in silence for long enough that Min-jun genuinely began to regret coming. Then, he kept us alive. Her voice was quiet, not accusatory, not warm, processing something in real time in the way she processed everything, thoroughly, without rushing toward a conclusion. He didn't just feel guilty, he actually, she stopped. The safe houses, the network, the people who taught us, the apartment, the book. She pressed her lips together. That was him. Yes, Min-jun said. A pause. Why didn't he tell us? Min-jun had thought about this carefully before coming. I think, he said, because he didn't believe he earned the right. He didn't do it to be forgiven. He didn't do it to be known. He did it because it was the only thing left that he could actually do. Rain held the records without reading them. That's the most complicated thing I've ever heard, she said finally. Helping from a distance, for years, without attaching your name, without creating any mechanism for anyone to feel anything toward you for it. She paused. He gave us everything we needed to become capable of walking through that door and taking from him the thing he'd been holding. Another pause. He built the path that led directly to his own demotion, she said, and he did it on purpose. This is the question that keeps me up at night, honestly. What do you do with someone who fails you catastrophically and then spends 4 years quietly rebuilding the thing they broke without ever asking to be seen for it? Is that redemption? Is it just guilt with better logistics? What would you call it? Davina's response when Rain brought the records to her that evening was characteristically structural. She looked at the records for less time than Rain had. She set them down face up. He's been our guardian, she said, in the only form available to someone who didn't believe they had the right to be anything else. He couldn't protect our parents, so he protected us, at a distance, without a name attached, with no expectation of being known for it. She looked at the window. The man who failed the ghost built the foundation that allowed the ghost's daughters to reclaim what was theirs. A pause. I don't have a category for that. She looked at the records once more. But I think our mother would, she said quietly. The hidden accounts were the structural revelation. The records were the human one. Davina had explained the accounts with the same directness she brought to everything. Their father had not built the syndicate's financial foundation on systems that Kang Woo controlled. He had built it on systems that responded to one authentication only. Theirs, their voices, their biometrics. The codes he had given them in the years before they were old enough to understand what they were receiving, embedded in memory rather than in any external device, waiting dormant for the day they would need to be used. The ghost hadn't left the empire to whoever survived him. He had left it in trust, with a specific and elaborate mechanism ensuring that the trust could only be claimed by the people it was meant for, his daughters. When Davina told Kang Woo this, standing at the window, her voice still and precise, almost gentle, Min-jun watched the color leave his face in a slow, sequential process.
Possible.
Not shock, exactly. Something that had been partially known and was now being fully confirmed. Something the body had suspected and the mind had managed not to know. You've been operating the surface, Davina said. The machinery. The day-to-day movement of resources through channels you control. She looked at him. But the engine that makes the machinery possible is ours, Rain said. She looked at Kang Woo directly. Something in her face had settled, not hardened, but settled, like ground that has been broken and turned and is finally being walked on with purpose. It was always ours, she said. The guards in the corridor had already repositioned without being instructed to, not facing inward toward the protection of the man at the desk, facing outward, around the two girls by the window. The old loyalty surfacing after 4 years of waiting, the foundational layer, doing what it had been designed to do. Kang Woo sat very still. "We are taking control of the syndicate," Davina said. Not a threat, not a declaration, a fact being delivered to someone who needed to receive it. All financial structures transferred to our authorization, all loyalty protocols reset. The organization our father built will be administered as he intended, including every design specification that was never implemented, the community investment structures, the exit frameworks, the ethical constraints built into the original philosophy that disappeared somewhere in the years of your regency. Kang Woo said nothing. There was nothing to say. She was right. On every point, in every particular, she was right. And he knew it. And she knew he knew it. "You will remain," she said, "in a different role. We're 7 years old. We need people who understand the operational reality of what this is, who can execute without attempting to override, who have enough history with what our father built to implement it correctly." She set the photograph back on the desk, face up, so he could see them, both of them, young and laughing in the harbor light. Whether you can be that person is the choice we're offering you. Kang Woo looked at her for a long time. Then he looked at Rain. Rain was looking back at him with an expression he had no word for and would spend a long time trying to find one. It wasn't forgiveness. It was too complicated for forgiveness, too honest for the cleanness that forgiveness requires. It wasn't resentment. It had moved beyond resentment somewhere in the reading of those records, somewhere in the confrontation with what he had done quietly, without credit, for 4 years. It was something that held all of those things at once, unresolved, the way serious people hold contradictions, not by resolving them prematurely, but by letting them coexist until time and experience and the accumulation of small moments built something more complete. "I have a question," Kang Woo said. Davina waited. "Why give me the choice?" His voice was level. He was asking sincerely. "You have the accounts, you have the loyalty, you have everything you need to end my role here without my participation. You don't need my agreement, my cooperation, or my continued presence." He paused. "Why offer it?" Davina considered him. "Because our mother didn't hate you. In the last years of her life, she would say your name in the dark, not in anger, not as a curse, as a question, something she was trying to understand and couldn't quite." She paused. "She was a better person than most, and she chose not to hate you. That choice means something to us, whether or not you deserve it." She set the photograph down one final time. "And because our father built this for a world with room for people who make terrible mistakes and spend the rest of their lives trying to deserve the mourning anyway." The room was very quiet. "We are our mother's daughters," Rain said, "which means we don't get to be something she chose not to be." Minjun, in the doorway, made a sound he would deny for years, something small and involuntary and entirely human. Kang Woo looked at the photograph, at the woman he had failed, young and laughing, the harbor light generous behind her, at the man beside her who had trusted him with the most important thing he possessed and been let down by a 12-hour margin and a calculation that was right about everything except what mattered most. He looked at the two girls who were those people, continuing. "I'll stay," he said. Not "I accept," not "agreed," not any of the formulations of a man conducting a negotiation, just those two words, rough and unornamented and entirely sincere. 2 words from someone who had been waiting 4 years for a context in which they would mean something. I'll stay. They say the longest night in the history of the syndicate was a Tuesday in October. The guards on the lower floors never fully understood what happened, only that a sequence of orders arrived through trusted channels, restructuring everything, and that by the time morning broke over Seoul, the financial architecture of an organization that had been unchanged for 15 years had been permanently and irreversibly altered. By the following week, quiet people appeared in offices on 6 continents, precise, prepared people who moved through the organization's records with the specific confidence of those who had been studying them from the outside for years, waiting for this exact moment. Those who understood more had been waiting longer. They were the foundational layer, the people who had known the ghost, who had understood the why underneath the what, who had spent 4 years performing loyalty to the visible organization while maintaining a deeper loyalty to something older and more structural. They had raised 2 girls through a sequence of careful locations, teaching them languages and mathematics and the architecture of power that their father had embedded in a tablet inside a picture book. They had prepared them for one specific night. They were not disappointed. In the months that followed, the organization changed. Not overnight, real transformation never is, regardless of what the night that initiates it looks like. The community investment frameworks came first, resources redirected toward the populations the syndicate had been extracting from for decades. Then the exit structures, genuine pathways out for the people who wanted them, with the support to make the exit real. Then the harder work, the cultural transformation of an organization built on fear and maintained by threat, slowly and imperfectly, and with constant resistance, into something that reflected what the ghost had originally designed. Kang Woo executed all of it. He was better at this, Min-jun would note this privately and then openly, than he had been at the version of power he had held before. Not because he was better than he had been, but because for the first time he was working towards something that felt like it had a right to exist, something built for people other than himself, something whose blueprint had been drawn by someone who understood what power was actually for. He was not forgiven, not simply, not cleanly, not in any form that resolved the weight between them into something lighter. Forgiveness is not a single moment. It is 100 small moments, then 1,000, accumulated at the pace they can honestly arrive. And Davina and Rain were 7 years old, with decades ahead of them in which those moments would come when they came. What they had offered was not forgiveness, but something more honest. Consequence, responsibility, the chance to spend whatever years remained answering the question, what do you do with the rest of your life after you've broken something irreplaceable? He understood this. He took it anyway. One evening, several months after the October night, Min-jun found Rain alone in the Forbidden Office, which was no longer the Forbidden Office, which had been opened and changed and made into something else in the space of that single night. She was sitting by the window, feet not quite reaching the floor, looking at the city. He stood in the doorway for a moment. "Do you think it's going to work?" he asked. He meant the organization, the transformation, the long, difficult, imperfect project of making something good from something that had been built without that intention. Rain looked at the city for a moment before she answered. "I think it's the kind of thing that never fully works," she said. "You just keep trying in the direction of what's right and see how far it takes you." A pause. "That's what our father believed, that structures don't become good all at once. They become good through the accumulated weight of individual decisions made in the right direction." She looked at her hands. "He built this to aim at something. We're just pointing it where he meant it to go." Min-jun nodded. "Do you forgive him?" he asked. He didn't clarify who he meant. He didn't need to. Rain was quiet for a long time. "I think forgiveness is the wrong word," she said finally. "Forgiveness sounds like something that finishes, like the account gets closed and the weight disappears." She shook her head slightly. "This doesn't finish. He made a decision and our parents died, and those are facts that don't change because of anything that comes after. But," She stopped, started again. He kept their photograph where he would see it every day. He kept us alive for 4 years without ever asking to be known for it. He stayed when we gave him the option to leave. She looked at the window. I don't know if I forgive him, but I think I understand him, and I think that's the beginning of something. Davina appeared in the doorway. She looked at her sister for a moment, reading her the way she always did, completely, efficiently, the way you read someone you've shared every moment of your life with. Then she came and sat beside her, feet not quite reaching the floor, shoulder touching shoulder. 2 little girls in a room that had stopped being forbidden, with the whole weight of an inherited empire sitting in their small shoulders, and their feet still 2 inches from the floor. The world had asked a great deal of them. It had not asked them to be tall. For a long time, neither of them said anything. The city burned below, all those millions of lights, all those millions of lives, the entire enormous, ordinary world that their father had moved through like a current and left something permanent inside of. Do you ever think about what he would say? Rain asked, if he could see this. Davina thought about it seriously. I think he'd say we were doing it right. Not perfectly, but in the right direction. She paused. I think he'd say that's the same thing. Rain leaned her head against her sister's shoulder. The photograph was still on the desk behind them, the man and the woman, young and laughing, harbor light warm and golden around them. Still there, still the reason for everything, still the foundation underneath the foundation, the love that had built the thing, the love that had left the codes in the twins, and the loyalty in the network, and the tablet in the picture book, the love that had refused, even in its ending, to leave nothing behind. The ghost had never really disappeared. He had understood with the specific clarity of a man who knew exactly what world he was operating in, that he might not survive to see his daughters grow, so he had planted himself inside them, in the codes, in the values, in the architecture of everything he had built and aimed at something larger than himself. He had trusted the world to deliver them to the moment they were built for. The world, in its oblique and almost unbearable way, had honored that trust. What would you do if the consequences of your worst decision came back and stood in front of you, and they were 7 years old, and they had their mother's eyes? Does a man who fails catastrophically but spends 4 years quietly fixing what he broke without ever asking to be seen for it, does he deserve the chance to be better? And could you do what they did? Walk through the door that holds everything you lost, face the person whose decision took it from you, and choose to build something from the wreckage instead of burning it down? The ghost built an empire. His daughters built something harder. They built a future from the wreckage of a past that had tried to erase them, and they did it by refusing, deliberately and at real cost, to become the worst thing that had ever happened to them. They did it at 7 years old, in box braids with gold beads, in a forbidden office that was no longer forbidden, because some debts can never be fully repaid. But some people, given the chance, will spend every remaining day of their lives trying. And some children, the ones raised on love that refused to disappear even after the people carrying it were gone, are wise enough to understand that trying is not nothing. Trying is, sometimes, everything that is left, and sometimes everything that is left is enough.